Hello, everyone. Settlers Lament here. It's been a little while since my last live stream, I'm back again for another one. I always tell myself that I want to do at least one of these a week, or not at least, about one a week. But I've been failing with that a lot. So here I am back with some of the regular guests and some new ones. And today we'll be today we'll be talking about tradition. What does tradition really mean? In the right, it's something we talk about a lot, but a lot of these terms that we use can often be really vaguely defined. So I think it would be useful to discuss it a bit and see what we can get out of it. But yeah, so that's going to be the topic for today. We have these four people. I'm pretty sure everyone here has been on my channel before, although it's been a while since Renaissance Man was here. But would everyone like to introduce themselves quickly?
Hey, I'm Renaissance Man. I mean, that's not really the name I like going by. I like going by Ephraim. The whole reason the channel is called that because I figured, well, SEO. And I mostly do stuff on religion on my channel, practical advice, leading life well, and also, the occasional political issue, right? So that's basically what my channel is.
Well, I'm the 21st Reaction. I have a little YouTube channel that sometimes I post on. Largely, the intention is to describe the liberal arts from a more reactionary perspective, because we often have this problem where, the dominant university system, liberal arts is something that you kind of pick and choose, and it's not really a tradition, as with the ethos of this live stream. It's not really a tradition that is full and comprehensive and builds up the person in a certain way. So that's the main purpose of my channel. Right now I'm starting, although I've been a bit lethargic about it, I've been starting with a series deconstructing the Constitution, kind of how we got here. So my channel will generally be historical and based in the liberal arts.
Yes, and my name is Mr. Patriarch. That's my pen name. I have a channel on YouTube, which I started earlier this year. I discuss culture, metapolitics, and also history. History is sort of what I studied academically. And I'm currently finishing a multi-part series on fascism. Like Settler, I've been struggling to find the motivation to knock that out, but being a new dad and whatever, it's hard to find time or the willpower. But I got a next video coming out on my channel is going to be juxtaposing normative Italian fascism with National Socialism before I finish off the series. So yeah, that's what I do, and happy to be here.
Wow, yeah. We have no reason to be lethargic, but you have a very good reason. Tradition in action.
Yeah. Precisely, Mr. Patriarch Man. Yeah, and I also do talk about family life a little bit, and religion as well. I myself am a convert to Eastern Orthodoxy, and that's kind of sort of informs my worldview.
Yeah. In fact, actually, I think that one of the most useful things that we could do with right now, actually, is to distinguish National Socialism from the more Mediterranean fascism, because they're actually very different. And they're often conflated.
Yeah, they definitely are. And I see both, kind of in our sort of circles of YouTube, and of course in the more wider popular culture, this term fascism is used interchangeably for both phenomenon, but they're by no means the same thing.
Yeah.
And if anyone's really interested in kind of a deep dive discussion, I had actually an interview with Paul Gottfried, who's a professor emeritus and scholar, historian of ideas. And I reviewed his book and interviewed him on his book, Fascism, The Career of a Concept, on my channel. So if anyone wants some real nitty gritties, they can check that out in addition to the other videos I put out.
I just wanted to mention on that point of that failed and bad political movement, that it was kind of it was kind of opposed to traditionalism in one sense, in that it was modernist. They were progressives. They did believe in kind of the progressive Whig view of human development, and people don't usually bring that up, and it's kind of like I would say it was an extreme right-wing movement that existed solely within the frame of the 20th century, that incorporated modernism, incorporated this kind of democratic zeal. So I just wanted to bring that up for that, because people don't really remember that it was actually kind of a modernist movement.
Yeah, I mean, on two fronts, right? Like, you've got Giovanni Gentile, the second author of the Doctrine of Fascism, the other one being, of course, Benito Mussolini, and he was a neo-Hegelian, right? And at least from a Catholic position, I'm not sure I can speak from Eastern Orthodox one, but Hegelian philosophy is generally anathema, particularly the views of the Trinity that Hegel held, and the whole strange dialectical view of history. It's all very anti-Catholic doctrine, although the economic doctrine of fascism, the economics was often based actually on Catholic social teaching to some extent. I think it was through Georges Sorel, but I'm not sure. I haven't really studied much political theory in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting tact for the discussion, talking about tradition and fascism. But I think
it's not a tradition.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, in a colloquial sense, anything can be a tradition.
Yeah, but it is. I guess it is sort of an interesting case study as regards, tradition, because both of you guys are right. Fascism is a modernist 20th century ideology, and it was very consciously promoted itself as such. It was very futurist. If you look at the artists who were into it, the Italian futurists, they were all gung-ho for fascism. They hopped on board. And it was wanted to sort of take society forward. So the current existing order was not serving, the desired goals of the fascists in their opinion. So they wanted to sort of build on it. And unlike National Socialism, however, it did have sort of a synthetic tacked on traditional element in Romanitas. That was the sort of, if you wanted to call it, the traditional element of fascism. So it seeked to sort of recreate the grandeurs of Rome, and because of Italians, because of our Latinity, Spaniards, and so on and so forth. We have this connection to an ancient and exalted past, and we're trying to sort of recreate that in a certain form in the modern era. And that was part of the Italian fascist product. So in one sense, it was modernist and futurist, but in the other, it was reaching back to a time of Roman greatness. But of course, this was at odds with the preceding, 1,500 years or whatever of Christian Italian history. And so it had this kind of tension with traditional Italian society with the sort of neo-pagan Romanitas ideology of the and imagery of the fascist regime. So there was always an uneasy alliance between Italian conservatives and Italian fascists. It was there, but they were by no means the same thing.
In fact, this, I think, provides a really good segue into discussing traditionalism itself, because one of those futurist artists was somebody that I'm sure that people on the right will be somewhat familiar with, but not really people outside of it, and that would be Julius Evola and his view of religion. Now, this comes into, well, the particular concept that I'm talking about here is perennialism, wherein there is seen to be this one root tradition which undercuts all religions, and somehow in a rationalistic and, kind of Gnostic affair, we can somehow create our own traditions that mirror this primordial tradition. Now, of course, this is anathema to pretty much all of European history and really anybody else besides that. I don't think that Hindus would particularly like this. Maybe more modern ones, but traditional Hinduism would have a problem with this, because it's essentially saying that, first of all, we can just create our own traditions and none of the pre-existing ones are right. And second of all, it ultimately places the emphasis on man as opposed to God, which is the ultimate end of little t traditionalism, right? There's no sense having a tradition of thinking about the world if it isn't there to serve as some sort of exterior truth. And Evola, of course, and I'd say this for the Theosophists and all of the very strange, I call them Gnostic thinkers of the late 19th and early 20th century, they all focused it interiorly and made it very subjectivized. So I think we can say right here that capital T traditionalism, the René Guénon and Evola school, is cringe, in fact.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've never read much Evola. I've heard people talk about him and stuff. But from the bits that I do know about it, it doesn't sound that different from modernism. The actual concept of modernism, not the not the catch-all denunciation that ECATHs use the term modernism as, but the actual concept sounds quite similar.
Yes, it is. It's exactly identical. It turns. If anybody here in the chat has read Lamentabili of Pope St. Pius X, the particular things that he anathematizes there are defining metaphysical assumptions of all of the traditional capital T traditionalist schools. This emphasis on interior truth and that our mind somehow defines reality to some extent, that we can, that there isn't any pre-existing tradition. All of these things were being dealt with in the beginning of the 20th century, at least within the Catholic world, and to a lesser extent in the Protestant world. So it's important to deal with that first, because really capital T traditionalism is just like a kind of a LARP where you take the pieces that you like from the various it's spiritual tourism, right? And I don't think that we can say this is anything but cringe.
Yeah, it's it's a new age for wignets is essentially what it is.
Yeah.
What wasn't New Age originally a far right concept? I could be wrong, but wasn't it?
No, it originated at one of the world fairs in the US in the 1890s, and there were a lot of figures who were associated with the hard right, but there were also a lot of Fabian socialists and leftists involved with it. So it wasn't really a strictly political movement as a strange, demonic, quote unquote, spiritual movement, right? That just sort of warped everyone that was involved with it.
Yeah, and the other thing too, which puts it at odds with basically any religion, as far as I'm aware, certainly all the Abrahamic ones, and this would include Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, is this traditionalism with a capital T that you're talking about, Renaissance Man, is entirely devoid of revelation. It's trying to sort of, like you say, it's spiritual tourism. It's taking the little bits that you like, the things that you think are, quote unquote, vital elements and persistent throughout history, and, trying to amalgam some sort of worldview with it. But the important thing to remember is that basically all major religions rely on their source of legitimacy as divine revelation, and I think in this sense, it should not be confused with traditional Christian social teaching or worldview.
There's a little bit of a problem there when you come to Eastern religions, right? In the West, you're completely correct, right? Judaism, Buddhism, no, not Buddhism, Baha'i, Christianity, those sorts of Western religions, with some exceptions, are largely grounded on divine revelations and, coming to conclusions from that. They're exoteric. You judge the spiritual experience that you have, or the spiritual life that you have based on the texts. However, in the Eastern religions, at least so far as I understand, it's a complete chaotic mess. You actually, and this is probably why, you actually use your spiritual experience to judge the spiritual texts. So you go and read the Upanishads or something like that, and you base that on your spiritual experience. So it's not strictly true that, but that's why you have a lot more cohesion in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and frankly, a lot more sanity. And yet in the Eastern religions, you've got 50 billion different cults. Like Hinduism as a concept has only existed since the British took India.
So you're saying that the Eastern religions are mostly Protestantism, but on steroids?
I mean, no, like you see, at least Protestantism and modern Judaism are grounded to some extent with a. I mean, I don't want to get too critical here. There's a lot I could say, but at least they're grounded on some sort of text, and they try and judge themselves by that text.
Yeah, at least Lutherans have their fundamental principles on which they base their faith.
Yeah, you can point to the Calvinists and say, well, at least they've got an incredibly selective reading of St. Augustine. But so far as I understand, the Eastern religions have nothing of the sort.
So now we can see why those San Francisco hippies seem to have an adoration of these Eastern religions, even if it's from a very shallow surface level comprehension of them, because to them it kind of appears as a liberation of their spirituality, the true free religious expression.
I don't understand how you could have like a bunch of, well, let's say like the boomer generation, right? How you could have 2,000 years of Christian tradition. You have people like St. John of Damascus. You have St. Gregory Palamas. You have St. Thomas Aquinas. You have all of these authors who like grounded everything they said to as much as they could in reality. They have these huge scriptures that can be read for hours and hours at a time. And they all of a sudden decide that Buddhism, a religion that decides that rather than trying to solve the problems of mankind, it's better to kill the patient, and then decide that that's the enlightened religion and then adopt that. It's absurd, right? But I suppose that just goes to show the lack of education in the particular little t traditions that are about in the West and about in the world, frankly. Right, so they just say, "Oh, new." They adapted it, and well, we've seen the results.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the reason why Buddhism and stuff like that is so attractive for leftists is because they know nothing about it. I don't know much about Buddhism either, but I see every once in a while edgy quotes from the Buddha, and I know how authentic these are, and how if this is. How representative it is, but I'm quite confident that a guy that lived like 5,000 years ago was not a 21st century progressive. But the reason they're interested in Eastern religions isn't because they find anything actually particularly interesting about it. It's because it's such a black hole to them. It's something they know so little about that they can project their own belief systems on top of it.
I don't think it's that well thought through. I think it's just a love of the exotic. Because if they actually follow through their conclusions with, say, Buddhism, or with any of the pantheistic forms of Eastern religion, they'd have a very serious problem. Because then that would mean that there would be moral justification for anything, right? This is why we see in India such a preponderance of rape. Because if everybody is one, you can't violate a person. So,
wait, don't the progressives like that? That's like utilitarianism, except pantheism kind of works with that really well then.
No, because then you wouldn't have a rape culture because there's no distinct persons to violate. You see the problem? if everything is one, bro, like you can't commit a crime, and everybody who has something happen to them, they deserve it because everyone is one.
Well, I'm just thinking of the progressive doesn't really believe in evil as some transcendental thing that actually exists. They don't really think of crime. They only believe like in mental illness. They believe in equality. So you'd think that pantheism would work with this quite well, and that they'd accept, obviously. Honestly, I don't think they're actually against the thing that you're talking about, that they're probably against, but I don't know, it just seems to drive a bit with that.
Yeah, but the problem is that you have the problem of, well, who do I apply the pronouns to, right? If everyone is one, then why even use a pronoun?
Well, because we perceive in this way, we perceive, although it's not actual reality, we perceive, and so we'll just have some nice conventions that will eventually go away as we fully morph into the Borg together, into the collective together.
So actually, this is actually contrary to from what I understand Buddhism to be, right? Buddhism is about stripping away the ego, and all of these games with identities when they aren't actually grounded in anything, right? Like, I'm not speaking about ethnic identities or, obviously grounded things like that. A lot of it is just ego, right? And you have this religion that denies ego, right? And this is why I think that there's no actual thought going into adopting Buddhism, or even like in a particular appeal of the metaphysics. It's just something that's exotic and cool, and people can wear the beads and all of that, and do the whole Hindu thing and read like the various sutras and stuff, right? And just look cool. They're not actually giving it much thought.
Well, yeah, of course, they don't really give much thought to things. They don't follow through courageously on things very much. That's why they're progressives. But I'm just saying the general idea of pantheism melds with progressivism so well because, I mean, in the end, what are we transitioning towards? We're transitioning towards this absolute, like, transcendental equality of all beings. And perhaps that could morph eventually into pantheism, where we are all one. And, we have these conventions where, instead of being rooted in a gender and rooted in a certain place or whatever, we can eventually disintegrate those. And we just need a transition phase, kind of like socialism into communism. We just need a transition phase with pronouns and sexual deviancy and lots of terrible things and globalism.
Let me get this straight, right? So you're saying, we're going to make everybody minorities so everyone can become a majority and everyone can become one. You see the contradiction here?
Yes. Well, of course. Progressivism is about struggling against reality itself. So it is kind of contradictory. But I don't know. Maybe I'll observe the possibility of pantheism some other time. We already think that they're fundamentally incoherent, yet they still go on with their insanity. So,
and they're succeeding, so they can't be that dumb.
Well, they're coherently incoherent. They're very sanely insane, and in that it's not selecting towards truth; it's selecting towards power. So it's literally power speaking down to truth instead of the opposite. It's kind of hilarious.
Well, you see, the thing is that truth has a power of its own, which is why we follow it. The trouble, I understand what you're saying, right? But the trouble is that I don't think that particular tact of might makes right from progressives is in any way sustainable. These people don't even have children. They're murdering their own children. They are engaging in transient, meaningless relationships that lead to no children. Like, how can we possibly expect this status quo of progressivism, unquote, to endure? Right? This isn't related to the stream title at all, but this is just what I'm thinking at the moment.
No, it's fine. I don't care. Wherever the conversation goes, it's fine.
We'll return it back to tradition. We'll return back to the roots of tradition and history at some point. But I will answer Renaissance's question. And I think that, we have to think progressivism is just basically a cult of power. It has many coalitions, lots of low status people that they convince and hypnotize. So, obviously those like deluded awfuls and the low status people that just choose not to have children and all of that, they're kind of like the victims and the useful idiots. But there's also a ruling class element to it. The people that are high up in media, in universities, obviously these people don't have don't have children or traditions or stuff like that sustain themselves either. But how it works, it's like an organ that continually produces more elites through its system of media narrative and education. So eventually, like, even though maybe Bill Gates doesn't have babies, another person, Jeff Bezos, rises up and fulfills the same role because of the incentives that are set up.
Well, so, they're a ruling class, not a ruling family. It's like the eunuchs in China.
Yeah, but you'll recall from the scriptures, specifically Exodus, this is mentioned a couple of times, that God visits the iniquities of the fathers unto the third and fourth generation. So you may have these very high-class people, these very rich people who may have billions of dollars and such, but if they aren't living their lives in accordance with wisdom, and they're leading them in accordance with mammon, and leading them in accordance with things that are contrary to reality, then this is going to be visited upon the third and fourth generation. And as we know, incompetent people don't hold power for very long. And so I don't see it lasting that long.
Which is why I'm here, and I want to. I'm planning on it, Renaissance.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't see them being like, I mean, they may seem big now, but nah, just wait them out. You know, like I'm sort of saying this because yesterday I was talking with a bunch of friends of mine, and they were talking about the Great Reset and how they think this is going to be a huge deal. And I really don't think it is, because I think it's impossible. Because the entire system on which the whole concept of the Great Reset is founded on is so vulnerable. You could undermine internet usage incredibly easily. You could undermine, I mean, if you use, for example, cashless economy, right? A cashless economy depends on the electrics working. It requires the internet to be working. Now, what happens if you have an earthquake and people can't buy bread because they can't log on to their cashless account? Do we not see how this is not survivable?
Yeah, it's problematic, as they say. One thing that to sort of bring it back a little bit earlier, fundamentally, progressivism suffers from a lack of coherence in worldview. Is essentially the problem. It doesn't have a holistic, accurate conception of man, of what man is, of what man's telos is, his purpose, of any of that sort of thing. It's based upon these assertions, on sort of what they wish society to be like human rights, for example. They base the worldview on human rights. But that itself is a problem, because then, from whence do these human rights come? The government, that's a problem. And the way they've organized a system of sort of trying to create their worldview based on human rights is that it necessitates an ever-expanding state to grant an ever-increasing list of rights to the populace. But as Renaissance Man says, this sort of system, it becomes very top-heavy in fairly short order, and it sort of grinds. There's a period of acceleration, but then the endless march of this crusade of human rights and whatnot inevitably creates so much overhead that it just sort of grinds the whole system to a halt, and things can't function. So, like you're saying, you have all these issues of transgendered bathrooms and whatever, and layered on top of each other, it's just transgender bathrooms on top of transgender bathrooms, and UBI's next, and then now the economy's shafted and we need to build back better, and you get to a tipping point at a certain amount of time, and it's because that the worldview that this whole thing is built on is not based on anything real. It's based upon progressive assertions as to what humans are, which is fundamentally wrong. And in this sense, it is anti-traditional, because pretty much everywhere, traditional societies, whether they're in the East or in the Christian West, have had a somewhat constrained vision of the world. And that's, I think, the small t tradition, which is of value, this recognition that universally across all societies which have persisted, that there are certain things which we can't let go by the board. And ignoring these is done at one's own peril.
Actually, I've noticed someone in the chat talk about the definition of cringe. What do we even mean by cringe anymore?
I mean, like I don't know if I said this before the show started or after, but it's mostly just a naming convention. Is X cringe that I'm using? But yeah, I mean, I'm not totally sure what exactly cringe is.
Yeah, you see, like you say, it's a convention, right? But I think there's quite a lot we can do with it, right? It may just be a title to get people in for a bit of a laugh, but why not play around with it? So what would you guys say that cringe is?
Well, cringe is basically that internal feeling of discomfort you have when you see someone else, and it's this kind of dramatic irony, right? Where you see that they think they're actually doing something, they think they're actually fulfilling a goal when they're actually seriously failing at it or embarrassing themselves. So it causes this kind of empathic discomfort within you. You cringe at that, and so I think it just comes down to is trying to do tradition in this age a LARP. Is it going to be a LARP, kind of like the fascists were LARPing for Romanism in the 20th century, literally a millennia after the Romans were actually doing stuff?
I mean, to be fair, they did LARP so hard they conquered Ethiopia. Like, is it really? I mean, you see, LARPing implies that nothing's going to happen, right? And then they go and conquer the last free African country. So I don't know if you could call it LARPing. I see what you mean. It's kind of got the same cringe. The cringe has the same kind of internal revulsion that you get at LARPing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. What is the essence of cringe? I'm just imagining Jordan Peterson asking, "Well, it depends what you mean by cringe." But yeah, it is an important question, as silly as it may seem. So the way I think about it, right, is when you guys, of course, remember the Pussy Hat March after Trump was inaugurated. That was quite cringeworthy. And why was it cringe? It was cringe because fundamentally it was a clash with reality, right? It was a clash against, it was a revolt against truth and a revolt against, all kinds of things. And it's hard to sort of spell it out. It's sort of one of these things. It's like pornography. It's hard to explain, but you know it when you see it. Where there's there's just a disconnect with the way the world is, the way people are. It can show that someone is suckered by the corporate press and is being spoon fed just lies, and they're gobbling it up and so on and so forth. But I think fundamentally what cringe is it's a rejection of truth and anything that is tangible.
I don't know if it's a rejection of truth. I mean, you can have a true meme and it will be cringe because you've written paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs.
Yeah. Well, I guess there are subsets of cringe, I suppose, right? So the wall of text meme, if you make one, could be factually true but cringe, just as the Pussy Hat March is cringe but in a different way. So it's, I don't know. One's aesthetic and the other one is, I guess, a more I'm getting tongue tied here, but a more profound clash with the senses.
Actually, I've got a question for you guys. You know those women that wear those hats? They go like the "my body, my choice" thing. Well, you see, was it really their body when the same women who were protesting and throwing stuff at the police over the summer were thrown in prison? Did their bodily autonomy then when they were put in a jail cell? Of course not. So why do they believe in it?
Well,
they apparently don't believe in jail either. So
they don't have beliefs. They don't have beliefs in the same way that we do. A belief is simply like a momentary tool or mechanism for them to get what they immediately want, because they're basically, their desires rule them. As someone like as a wonderful scholastic like Renaissance would say, that their passions and their vices rule them. And so basically it's whatever talking points, whatever things that they have to say in the moment in order to get what they want immediately. You can see this kind of behavior with someone like Vosh, where he was debating Destiny over the Kyle Rittenhouse scandal, and Destiny was just shocked about how idiotic and ridiculous the reasoning and the principles that he was pulling up out of his arse in order to argue the side he was arguing in that moment. It's kind of like a game to them.
Yeah.
In a sense, they are. It's literally immature. They are like children. They're not fully developed. They're at a lower mode of being.
I kind of. You see, I'm not. Do I believe that? I don't know. I don't think they're giving it much thought. I think it's just that they're going with the crowd, right? The world is in like a, not like creation itself, but you know when they say in the scriptures of the world, right? Like the world is never a coherent thing, and so we shouldn't expect people who are obviously behaving of the world and falling into that temptation to be coherent either.
Oh no, yeah, I agree with that. I'm just saying if they're going with the flow, they're going with the mob. Well, then they're going with what's convenient, and what's convenient when you're part of a mob, you feel like you matter, you feel like you're part of something that will win. So that kind of fits into the kind of behavior that I'm describing here, where they're just going based off of their immediate desires and wants and greed. Essentially, it's an avarice, in my opinion, but it's kind of sub-rational. So it's not really any higher thinking there. So going with the mob in the moment is completely reasonable to do in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also with the progressives. I don't actually there's obviously no rational motivation there. I don't know possibly what it could be beyond I don't want to get fired or wanting to lord it over other people, but you know, it's probably because I don't really talk to them much.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a decent amount of time around them. I'm still a very young strapping stallion, but I'd say that, you know, like I commented in a stream one time, it's about pleasure, status, and power. That's about 90% of their incentives for why they do things on an individual basis.
Hmm.
Hmm.
We have a couple super chats I think we could do right now. And two of these are directed towards you, Renaissance Man.
Okay.
Imperium of Keck for €5 says Renaissance, the Great Reset is dependent on the web, but so is our crypto blockchain utopia. Do you think that will coexist, or neither will? And he has a quick follow up in addition to that for $2. Starlink makes the web infrastructure resilient.
Okay, so I'll start off by saying that my credential to address these questions is that, I mean, I'm a graduate student in advanced computer science. I did my bachelor's degree in it, and specifically in networks as well. It says on the certificate I specialized in networks, but really I did more AI modules because I prefer algorithms. The problem is with crypto, as indeed another super chat says, you know, high IQ incompetent reactionaries should buy crypto for the sake of the low IQ and incompetent. Crypto has no basis in terms of actual, you know, value, because all crypto is generated from is by computers brute forcing blocks of encrypted ciphers, right? You generate the money by cracking a block, and you do this, you know, ad infinitum. The only use for it is that you can potentially, you know, transfer it around without being detected. There's no inherent value in crypto. Therefore, it's an awful investment. You see, at least fiat currencies, like, I mean, even then you couldn't say that the US dollar is, because that's backed by oil. But even fiat currencies in theory have the backing of the state in which you are using them in, right? Before you had gold standards, you had silver standards and things like that, which made money, you know, a reasonable investment. Crypto doesn't have this. So being involved in crypto is not a very good idea, first of all. And second of all, I have real problems with Starlink being seen as resilient, right? And for those who don't know, Starlink is a system by which I believe it's a satellite-based internet. So you buy, or you already have some sort of aerial, and you receive the internet through it, if I remember correctly. Now, you see, the problem with this, which is actually makes it more vulnerable than wired internet, so through fiber optic cables and through copper wiring and through gold wiring, if you're that, you know, that rich, is that that it is what's the word, transmitted through radio waves. This has problems with things like terrain. This has problems with things like weather. So if there's a weather event like a storm, you're going to have more problems connecting to the internet in that. And that's assuming that something doesn't go wrong on the satellite and then everything that is connected to Starlink dies, right? And you obviously don't have this problem with wired connections. Now, when I'm suggesting a breakdown in the sorts of things supporting the Great Reset, right? I'm talking not necessarily on a hardware level. Although it could be a hardware event, like a solar flare could wipe out all of the Cloudflare servers and you'd have half of the internet down, right? You could have a very serious... I think there was a solar flare in Canada that took out the power for a week, and that was in the 70s, and that caused chaos. If this hit the continental United States, you would cripple the entire world's economy in under a week. You wouldn't be able to do things like coordinate shipments of food to cities. Lots of cars would just cease to work because the ignition systems are based on computers. You know, like if you see a modern car, right, they have sensors around them to detect how you park, right? All of these things cease to work like that, right? And this is the thing that the people behind the Great Reset want to build on top of. You have one particular event. You have a tornado hits a server farm, right? You cause real serious problems for this system. And that causes economic damage. And of course, that has further ramifications. It may not completely cripple the technological system, but it will cause such economic strain that it causes power struggles and causes, vacuums. So to say they can, make you live in pod and eat bug is that, like, they might be able to do it for like a couple of years or, a decade, but eventually something will come along and, get rid of that. And these sorts of events are black swans, so you don't really predict them. So yeah, I suppose that's my answer to it.
Are you seething 21st reaction? For context, Renaissance Man 21st reaction is very pro crypto.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, I know. No, it's completely fine. It's completely fine. Am I able to? I'm able to share windows in the stream like Cringe Walker did eventually, right?
Yeah, I don't know how, but you probably can.
Yeah. So anyway, I just want to ask Renaissance because I did know that something interesting about all the awesome dissident right people and trads is that for some reason they're big on computers. They're very tech savvy people educated in that field. So yeah, I mean he described the basic ethos of like blockchain technology itself. But I want to ask him what is crypto and what are the cryptocurrencies and what is that sphere in general?
Well, I've never formally studied blockchain. I don't know the technologies behind it. I've, mined coins in the past. I used to use a laptop to mine Dogecoin. So I have like the basic conception behind it, but I ultimately don't think that really matters because at least I know the source of where the coins are generated. And the fact that this is just cracking random blocks of, cracking random block ciphers, right? You cannot get value out of that. It's not like going down to a mine and whacking away a vein of gold and then processing the vein, right? Or, mining hematite for iron. There's no inherent foundation in blockchain itself. It's just a collection of, block ciphers. You'd be better off cracking passwords with it.
Okay, so what I would say is that I mean, I don't think you. What I was saying is basically, if you were to read up about blockchain technology, you would be able to comprehend it in a way that I'm not, as someone that's basically amateur coming from that field. Whoa, we're on a very far tangent, but I love that we got onto crypto. But so I just suggest reading a bit more about that. And it's not necessarily just randomly using computer force to break through these blocks. But I'd also say that there's many different. I hate using the word cryptocurrency because they haven't realized that vision of being a currency. There's many different crypto assets, and the reason that there's many different ones is because they've served several different roles and functions in the entire new fintech sphere. So, for example, Bitcoin, the famous one, it's set up so the algorithms basically, that's the wrong word for it, but it's basically set up in order to have a disinflationary pattern where every 4 years the reward for mining and the supply, so there's a limited supply of 21 million, and the reward for mining and confirming transactions between the people halves every 4 years. So there's this disinflationary curve towards until we reach 21 million. Let me see if I can get the screen up.
I like to contradict that point. That actually makes it worse, because then that means that national economies can't control themselves.
Wait, why do we care about national economies?
Because we live in nations.
Why do we care about national economies? Great.
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying, kind of the monetary policy of
globalism, but based.
Yeah, yeah. Our national economies have kind of done some not fun stuff with the monetary policy, and that's exactly why something like Bitcoin was invented. It was invented in 2008, 2009, because of the crisis and the ridiculous monetary policy things like quantitative easing, all that stuff. I just wanted to show you that this is the logarithmic, if everyone can see, this is the logarithmic chart of Bitcoin from its lifetime from 10 years ago, so 2010 to 2020. And so you see there's like 1 cent, 50 cents, $1, $10, $10,000. Something like this that has a completely consistent logarithmic curve. I just don't think that something that has zero utility and people understand is completely useless and bereft of value. I just don't think something would behave like this over 10 years consistently.
No, the thing is that your graph actually contradicts you, because notice how many peaks and troughs there are. Why would an investor invest in something so volatile?
Well, okay,
I don't know much about the ins and outs of Bitcoin, but I do know a little bit. I've talked to some people who sort of invest in it and stuff, and the general understanding is that it's not a good store of value, but what it is it's a great gambling item, right? So people can and do make money off of Bitcoin, but it's precisely because of its volatility that they go for it, not because it's stable.
I'm sorry, but all of these conceptions and like presuppositions about it, impressions of it, are just wrong, because although yes, it does appear volatile, there are peaks and troughs, because I was talking about every 4 years that halving cycle happens where the reward gets halved. There's a market response to that where people get exuberant, and in response to the halving they have a big rally. So that's where you can see the three big ones there. But to say it's volatile, I don't understand what this means, because basically people that there's a meme in kind of the sphere, and it's called hodling, which just means you purchase it and you hold it. People that have held it for more than a year or 2 or 3 almost always are in the green because of that. So you ignore short-term volatility because there's this very, very clear pattern over the long term, and literally everyone that holds it for multiple years, even if they bought it at one of the extreme peaks, it ends up in the green no matter what. So it's like,
okay,
I mean, volatility, I guess, but volatility in the short term doesn't really matter to me.
Okay, so 2 points. First of all, that graph isn't uniform, so it's not giving an accurate perspective on the actual value of Bitcoin.
Well, secondly, I said it was a logarithmic chart, so it's not a linear chart.
No, I mean, like, look along the y-axis, right? You have the difference between $5 and $2 being more than the difference between 10,000 and 20,000. So you can't really say that. Second of all, if I'm running,
that's the point of the graph. Oh yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's not giving a particularly good impression. Now, the second point is, imagine I'm running a shop and I want to sell bread, and I go to bed in the evening selling my bread at say 1 times 10 to the -4 Bitcoins a loaf. And then I wake up in the morning, as your chart indicates, and it's now 1 times 10 to the -8 in value. How am I supposed to, like, considering how quickly Bitcoin changes with every different transaction, right? How are you supposed to run, the infrastructure of a sophisticated economy on something so volatile?
Well, that's exactly I agree with you, and that's why nobody in their right mind would sell it right now. All they would do is hold it as like an investment, as a store of value. Ironically, even though you guys think otherwise, that's why people hodl it over long amounts of time. The story is that if you see those peaks and values, the cycles, the magnitude of the bull runs that happen decrease over time, and eventually you'd expect, as we get closer to the 21 million maximum, that eventually it would level out, and then it would perhaps behave as a currency. But in no way is it a currency right now. It's obvious like some high risk innovative thing that you just hold on to.
Also, another thing in terms of its practicality, right? Why would you trust an entire economy to a single algorithm?
I didn't say trusting an entire economy to a single algorithm.
Well, we're talking about using Bitcoin as like some sort of replacement for regular currency, or like as some sort of.
I never said that.
Well, we shouldn't, right? That's been my point. And also, I don't think it's a good asset either, as we've just seen from your graph, right? That's my point. I don't think it should be invested in, because I don't think it's a good asset, because it's continually fluctuating in value. It's like if the dollar got bipolar.
It's been fluctuating upwards for about 10 years. Yeah.
Well, actually, if you return to that graph, you'll see that there are a number of occasions when it drops $1,000 in like what seems to be a week. I can't see the X rate, the X axis.
No, you're right. That's right. At the end of these bull markets, it decreases in value by about 80%, but that doesn't mean much after it goes through that rally that cements itself, and it basically increases multiple 10, 20 times. So decreasing 80% after that isn't a big deal if you're a person to hold it. Look, I mean, my main point is that as an asset, it's performed in a way that if you hold it for more than 2 years, you're almost guaranteed to have a very, very good return. That's the only thing I could say here is.
Okay, over the course of 10 years since Satoshi invented.
No, I mean, if you hold it for like 2 years at a time, then you're in the green.
Yeah, so if you're holding it for 20% of the entire existence of this particular asset.
Yeah, but I'm saying every 2 year period ever since Satoshi made it.
Yes, so you're talking about holding it for. You see what I'm saying, right? It's not dependable asset to take.
No, I'm saying no matter. I'm not saying you hold it for 2 year periods every single time forever. I'm saying any 2 year period in which you purchased it and then you sold it, it's in the green.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that you are depending on a very short, development timeline for crypto to rely on it. It's not something that's proven, and frankly, as we've seen from your graph, it's bouncing up and down like a yo-yo. Why would anybody invest in that? I said,
I have a question to sort of bring it back to the topic is if Bitcoin is not trad, then what is a trad currency?
Trad would be the gold standard because it's been around thousands of years and it's a good custom.
No, it'd be selling goats, because you see,
Okay.
I can get milk out of a goat. I can't get milk out of gold.
Well, now you can get milk out of gold. Now you can get milk out of gold because people are establishing these new automated lending and borrowing protocols. So now you can basically lend a digital representation of gold and receive a yield. Various, but
listen, mate. If I'm locked in a place, I'd choose a farm over like Fort Knox, right? Because I'm going to starve to death in Fort Knox.
No, I definitely agree with that. The goat is more trad than gold, but gold is also more trad than stocks or anything else.
More trad than Bitcoin, you might say, 21st?
Yeah, I would say it is more trad, but right now you have to play realpolitik.
I see. Real shekels for the modern age.
So you're saying like IBJ, YBJ, I'll be gone, you'll be gone.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my comments. Even though you got to understand, I'm a hyperbole enjoyer, so I would say
connoisseur.
Yeah, hyperbole connoisseur. I would say that my comment still stands. That's why if you're incompetent, if you're low IQ, don't touch it, don't hold it. Renaissance man's advice is perfect. Just leave it to the other people.
Now, to the listeners, this may seem like a huge digression, but I am here to point out that this is actually very much in line with the theme of the show, because what Bitcoin is, having listened to these two argue about it for a while, I think Bitcoin is an attempt to be trad in a non-trad age. So Bitcoin Bitcoin is the fascism of money, is essentially what I'm
No.
saying. It is. So
Wait, so you're telling me it's going to end up with like one half of the trads, one half of the cryptocurrency fighting against the other half?
maybe we'll see. But to sort of, I guess, sort of reel it back in. I say this half. I said that half in jest, but I think there is some truth to it in that. Yes, modern monetary policy is kind of out of control. You know, the balance sheet of the Fed has ballooned enormously. Money's being printed. You know, money machine go burr and all that. And what Bitcoin, I think, is an attempt is to try to go back to a more stable, you know, successful or not, was an attempt to sort of create the gold standard without the gold standard in a certain sense. And I think that in a way, that's kind of the predicament we find ourselves more broadly, right?
Actually, speaking of that topic, I have a super chat on that, so I might as well read that now. Sam153 for 5 Canadian says, would a return to the gold/silver standard be something possible for countries in the future? Is the force of modern fiat currency too hard to break?
I think it kind of depends on a number of factors. I know Muammar Gaddafi and I believe Saddam Hussein both seriously considered and were making steps to try and put their currency on a gold standard to get from under the petrodollar. And we all know what happened to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. So I think any serious attempt to try and make a gold or silver standard is dependent on the United States tolerating a threat to the current existing monetary system of the petrodollar and using the USD as the world reserve currency.
I would say that it would necessarily be based on the collapse of that monetary policy, because basically we have a system where they just purchase. It's literally just the monetization of the debt. They purchase more debt through these QE kinds of policies. They inflate the currency. They do that continually in order to get out of larger and larger economic crises. And long story short, it's eventually going to be unsustainable. Like, for example, right now, the Fed is putting interest rates down to zero, almost zero. Some developed countries like Japan have negative interest rates. And we're not even the part where...
I mean, that's actually based in trad. Interest shouldn't exist.
Yes, but they do that as a stimulative measure, and usually it's after the recession, the crisis has happened. But we've kind of put the mask on, quite literally, in that it looks like we're not in the recession crisis, but we're already in that. So once it becomes obvious, they can't push the lever down anymore. They can't lower the interest rates anymore. But nonetheless, I will salvage this tangent, and it is related to being trad, because the last 100 years has been just hedonomics on steroids. The continual culture of consumption based on this kind of deficit spending, this inflation. Buy now, don't save for the long term, spend now, kind of encourages this high time preference that is inherently degenerate. So eventually it will collapse, and we will return to tradition. We will return to the gold standard. But I think Seller's distracting me. I think that damn, you screwed up my train of thought. I think that eventually it'll reach a head, and in fact, these kinds of deflationary strategies like using gold is actually quite literally trad, because when you encourage people to save for the long term and you reduce their debt, you discourage debt, they're more likely to have children, they're more likely to think about the long-term outlook. It literally makes society more stable, change is slower, it makes it more traditional. And so there's this kind of feedback loop between economic practices and social and traditional ones.
I would definitely agree with that. I think these things are all tied together. So I think the cultural decay, the rise of the managerial state, the absolute absurdity of modern monetary policy and, open borders and all this stuff, these are all tied together, right? So we're seeing multiple manifestations, I think, fundamentally of society-wide spiritual decay. And the need for this hedonistic drive that the people have and that the elite have, really, because they're the ones steering the ship, is sort of spurring on all these unfortunate occurrences that we see all around us today. And money is just one case in point, a big one at that.
I feel like I'm starting to understand why I might be a Caesar, but other people might not. But that's another point. I did want to return to the general topic, and basically all these observations we've had, other than like the crypto one, is that there's a kind of revolutionary sentiment in these groups of people, whether it's the 20th century fascist movement, whether it's Evola and the fake LARPing traditionalists, whether it's that hippie that is interested in Oriental religion but not really. It's that they do believe in this Whig view of history, this kind of progress. They do believe in slowly changing it, transforming it over time. And this is why none of these ideologies are fundamentally traditional or reactionary. It's because tradition is about maintaining adherence to the rule or custom. And that's why there's different traditions of the world, because some people have different rules and customs based on different reasonings. And that's what it really is. I want to go back to a comment that was made at the beginning of the stream. And this person, Leo Cameron, says, if I can find it. Shoot, I hate this thing. Sorry, someone else go, because
I guess I can do another super chat. One sec. Imperium of Keck for €5 says, Renaissance Man, you can host programs on P2P blockchains, replacing servers, and proof of stake solves the block mining problem and transaction cost.
That's right.
Yeah, you can, but that doesn't change the fact that if the power goes out in the particular place you're at, you can't buy bread.
And I mean that's basically why people should still have like physical spending money with them. I mean this problem that we have with if the computers and the electricity and the internet go down, then everything goes down. Well, that's the problem that basically everyone in the modern world has now. So it's not really specific to this issue, but I mean it's true. We need to still be tethered to reality, even though we go to the frontiers of the internet ether.
I
think returning to money is the only real way to fix this problem.
But basically, and sorry for losing the thought, but
sorry, the question was for Renaissance Man. Did you have anything else?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, what the question? I already answered it.
Oh, okay.
It's like, well, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's peer-to-peer if you can't use the currency.
Well, you can use the currency if there's literally not like fallout, zombie apocalypse, the satellites get nuked, kind of apocalypse. I'm assuming that we're still going to have like electric grids and the internet in the near future, at least for the next 20 years before there's an apocalypse. So, but anyway, the other comment was about something that someone said originally at the beginning of the stream, and it was about, it was basically about, we need this compromise between progress and tradition, because tradition, kind of impedes progress, but we also need to hold to customs. And basically this point comes down to something that Thomas Carlyle was describing. And he's a complete reactionary because he sees it as a battle between order and chaos, and there's basically nothing in between. Any hint of progress leads down a slippery slope, as we've seen for the past, half a millennia. Any diversion from this perfect order, this perfect commitment to the rule, to the customs of society, will naturally cause it to disintegrate over time. So that's why I think tradition has to be held to almost ridiculously stubbornly, irrationally.
You stunned me with your brilliance.
High IQ.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't really have anything to say to that.
Sorry, I was getting sidetracked reading the comments. I'm very bad at multitasking, and being a dad and going to a barbecue and stuff today left me all tuckered out. But I think one of the things with this tradition, and one of the points that you highlighted, 21st, is this idea that we have to try and find a synthesis, right? So there is. It's funny because if you look at history, there is kind of a linear trajectory to things to a certain extent, right? You know, technology happens, the Enlightenment happened, industrialization happened, the world wars happened, and, you know, all this and so on and so forth. But what we're fundamentally trying to do now in the modern age is preserve what was good about the past. And that's sort of the task before us. And if you think about, you know, positive tradition, and the thing that I think kind of the, what you could say, the big T traditionalists like Julius Evola and whatnot, I think they were onto something in a certain sense, in that you do find certain practices, certain customs, certain temperaments throughout all civilizations, right? All cultures have music. All cultures have some conception of beauty, which they believe is objective. All cultures have, a family structure. All cultures, have less than progressive ideas about sexual mores, typically, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot to be unearthed, and what we're trying to overcome here is this crippling kind of nihilistic impulse of the modern age. And I think it is sort of nihilism, because I think people really don't believe in much of anything anymore. Part of the big problem is that leaves the door open for hedonism and filling their lives with junk. So whereas the drug addict, he suffers from nihilism too. He doesn't have anything to believe in or aspire to, so he takes drugs partially. But most of us, of course, aren't walking around with needles in our arms. But what we are doing is we're filling our time with, other things that are, hours and hours of video games and, whacking off to sad runaways on the internet and so on and so forth. So what we need to do, I think, ultimately is get people to believe in something greater than themselves. And I think unless you're able to do that, we're kind of stuck in a rut.
To add on to that, right, I don't think it can just be anything, because if you set the standard that low, you'll end up with some sort of paganism or some false religion for filling that void, and that's going to come with a lot of problems. Aside from like not being Christ, right? Because it's an incomplete system without Christ, you're going to end up with errors which are going to lead to the derangement of the entire civilization at large, as we've seen, right? There's a reason why they used to stomp down so hard on heresy, and it's because they are mental errors that lead to people viewing the world incorrectly, and therefore it damages human flourishing.
Yeah. I really, really agree with that.
Yeah. As there was a quote by there was this evangelical pastor and apologist, Ravi Zacharias, and he had one quote which stuck with me throughout the years when I was an evangelical, and it's still true today. And it was truth by definition is exclusive, right? So you're correct, Renaissance man. We can't just be like, oh, find your truth, bruh. Find something to believe in, Be yourself, be authentic. And that's another thing, be authentic. I mean, if you're a degenerate, being degenerate, authentically degenerate isn't the solution to your problems. So yeah, I think you're right. we got to offer the capital T truth here.
And I just want to build on that point. I mean, to anybody that thinks that you cannot be like ridiculously committed to the rule or the custom, in this case, of course, Christianity, to not stomp out people that break the rules, to not stomp out people that commit heresy. I mean, look what happened when they failed to do that. Look at what happened when they failed to stomp out heresy. Look at what happened when they failed to defend all these basic sacraments, these basic contracts that people commit to, like marriage, like indentured servitude, like all these things. It's just been an insane Pandora's box of civilizational decline. So when I see someone like in the comments, this just another transnational urbanite, rootless person saying tradition is not everything, we need a mix. Well, look at what happened when we mixed truth with mistruth. Look at what happened when we mixed order with chaos. It is a kind of all or nothing thing, and that's why you see. I love the hyperbole, but that's why you see. That's why I've always been interested more in the people that are at the extremes, the people that leave the Overton window, because they're not tethered to the position that the current time has been set out to us. So they have a specific view of it, that view of history and where we're going, that is just much more accurate. If you look at the 19th century radicals and the reactionaries, if you look at Carlyle and Whitman, these people predicted what would happen after that much better than anybody else, because they understood that things like, democracy was about tearing down hierarchies. It was about absolute equality. It was about basically dissolution. And it's either you're okay with that or you're against that. That's it.
Yeah, one example to give is that within 20 years of Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the door of a Wittenberg chapel, you had an apocalyptic sex cult seize a major city in Germany and run it. I think they were under siege for 2 years. So we shouldn't just pretend that changes in doctrine don't have serious consequences, particularly when they pertain to things like private judgment.
Yeah. You brought up something interesting, reaction in this comment you were addressing about mixing tradition with other things. I think one of the important things that I think gets overlooked is the necessity to have a firm understanding of the anthropology of man. So how is man? How does he function? And I think there's absolutely a lot of benefit in certain people like Carlyle and whatnot, this order versus chaos struggle, this eternal struggle. And that's certainly true. But I think if we look at religious iconography, and if you take the Holy Trinity just as an example, you have a holistic unit. You have one entity which is comprised of many parts, and they all have their own sort of individual characteristics, right? The Father is, somewhat distinct from the Son, and the Holy Spirit is distinct from the Father, yet they're all connected. They're all one. And I think that's sort of how we need to understand ourselves. And as individuals, yes, we are individuals. We do, I'm not the same as you. You're not the same as me, but we exist in a sphere which is beyond ourselves. And we're only truly human through our connection to others, and trying to foster that. So where you have order, right? But it's not at the total expense of, I guess, the distinct characteristics of individual persons. It's a tricky proposition, because I agree with you. It's, if it's all sort of liberal airy-fairy stuff, you run into the problems that we have now. But yeah, I mean, I think there does have to be a mix to a certain extent. Otherwise, you just lose your society in time.
Sorry, did Renaissance speak there?
No, I didn't.
I thought you were going to pounce on him for all his heresy.
Yeah.
What was he talking about? God in parts or something?
Yes,
he was like composite in parts, but he's divinely simple, and they're all of the same essence anyway. So they're all order.
Yeah, you realize that if you say that God is in parts, you fall into, well, not only formal heresy according to the Orthodox Church, but you also fall into the criticisms of the existence of God that are posited by people like Bertrand Russell.
Right. No, I'm
yeah,
Trinitarian
I know. I
like you
figured that would
guys.
just swap
I was
again.
just sort of outlining it as sort of for people in the chat to sort of follow and understand, right? So, God is one, yes, but there are three aspects of the God, right?
Oh, that's
So
another heresy too.
See, it's just
that's
we're just
Sabellianism. That's Sabellianism.
it's okay.
you know what? We're just spurgs. But beyond, I'm not worried about us being spurgs. I'm worried about the 95% of the population that are peasants, that are plebs, that are ants, that are normies. And basically, normies don't go through their everyday thing with some kind of transcendental purpose. They're not, kind of aware in the way that a spurg or an autist like us is. And I'm not saying that to cast aspersions on them. That's just the way things are. Human civilization is a pyramid where there's a couple at the top and there's a lot of people at the bottom, and they have a different roles in a relationship. But the point is, tradition tethers those people down in chains, locks them down, straps them down to the bed. And we need that, because otherwise, as Patriarch was saying, they sit around in the room all day, play video games, they look at dirty videos, they go and just go to McDonald's and gorge themselves. Like, the state of our normies is very tragic because of this loss of tradition. And you just see they're not self-aware. They say, "Oh, I'm so depressed. Oh, I feel purposeless." And then when you give them that tradition or purpose, they scoff and they look at it in disgust. It needs to be pressed down onto them from high. They need to be chained by the people at the top.
Yeah, you see, I don't think normies even exist.
What about NPCs?
I don't even think really NPCs exist, because it's reducing what is. I mean, they're in the likeness and image of God, and because of that fact, they have what is known as the personality of it, right? And personalities are incredibly complex things, and so you're dealing with people who, I mean, they may be more or less intelligent, they may be more or less extroverted or introverted, right? Like off YouTube before this whole lockdown thing, one of my hobbies used to be to just go down bars and talk to random people and have fun, like go with my mates, go bar crawl, do kind of what you would call normie activity, right? I don't think normies exist, because you get a few drinks into them, and they turn out to be like, they've got like really different personalities, and they do their thing, right? They might not be in the end of the internet where they know about Evola or I don't know, Aquinas, or they may not know these things. They may never have picked up a book of scripture and read them. They may never have really given it much thought, but they are so, people are so varied that I don't think I think almost the normie thing, like if you go on the chans and you read the way it's used as a sort of a derogative, it's almost like almost a quasi-Gnostic kind of thing, as if by virtue of not being a normie, there's some sort of higher level of initiation that people have, when I don't think that's strictly the case. They just choose to pursue different things.
I really like this foil that I'm developing here with Renaissance. It's a perfect dynamic. I would say that normie's gonna norm. They're gonna be normal and stuff. What I'm talking about is that kind of ridiculous impulsion to figure out what's exactly true, to figure out, to delve deeper into something all the way to the pit of it, kind of obsessively. And that kind of characteristic, I would say, is not normal. But I will moderate. I do agree with you that there's something in them that everyone has, and you can speak to that in anyone. But I think that an elite should speak that to them instead of just a regular person.
Yeah, and I don't think that the elite is necessarily ground by analytical thinking, because you can't, like, you can talk about systematic theology and religion, for example, and that does work. It's great. Like, you can come to conclusions very quickly with it, but ultimately, if you read the scriptures, it's a far more imagistic affair. It's far more about transposing types across different time periods, across thousands of years, and noticing the repeating patterns. You know, in Isaiah chapter 13, for example, Isaiah describes 200 years before it happens, the destruction, maybe even more than that, actually, like 250 maybe. He describes the destruction of Babylon as the stars losing their light, right? And obviously this doesn't happen. You'd think you'd find it in something like Herodotus if that happened, but it doesn't. But it's metaphorical. It's not something that you can necessarily split down and analyze. You have to fundamentally be a human being to understand what it means. Like the light was lost from the stars. You know, you can be like alone in the crowd. This isn't the kind of thing that you can analyze. You have to think about it, of course, but it's not this sort of strict analysis, true, false, formally logical, thing.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. And, yeah, we're not normal people, right? Normal people don't sort of spend their time, creating videos on abstract Catholic theology or, his weird historical oddities and so on and so forth. And I think for that reason, yeah, the Bible is the way it is. It has this imagery. It has this sense of beauty. It has this sense of epicness and story throughout it. And I think going forward, that's going to be sort of our key way of, reaching the, quote unquote normies out there. Because, and if you look at sort of how Christianity spread historically, yeah, there are arguments made and so on and so forth, but the real technical nitty gritties and whatnot of the theology were hammered out amongst the clergy, right? Amongst the elites, if you want to put it that way. And then from there, it was sort of disseminated down to, your normal people. So, and in order to do that effectively, you have to come at them through story. You have to come at them by playing on their innate sense of goodness, of beauty, and building upon the revealed truth that they already have. So,
well, I mean, I certainly, to some extent, I suppose I work on an analytical level, but I reject the conception that, well, first of all, that normies, whatever they are, right? I don't consider myself particularly distinct from normies, right? Cannot lack the obsession with analysis, right? They may well vary in that, but there's plenty of normies who are analytical. And I also reject the fact that we can't ourselves choose to take this more imagistic and more a narrative and more historical interpretation. You see, the problem that I'm having here with the whole normie label is that I don't think it, because it sets us as like a class apart from them when it really isn't the case.
Well, I mean, I think you wouldn't see a distinction between yourself and normies because you're like a normal, well-rounded, socialized person. Unlike some of the other people here, you're kind of in the wrong circle. But I'm joking a little bit. But let me just ask you this: are human socio-political hierarchies Gnostic in any way?
It depends entirely on the kind of metaphysical system that underlies and justifies that system.
Exactly. So that's why it's essential for it to be a kind of Christian elite in order to, the people that produce culture, that like Patriarch said, the clergy is having dialogues about theology. These people, this is like an elite activity that happens, and people that will purvey this culture to people. And culture, it does kind of have this imagery to it that you guys are talking about that appeals to the everyday person. That's how they're going to speak to the huddled masses, and that's how they'll breathe free. But I still am an elitist.
Well, okay, let me ask you a question. Why do you think there was such a massive apostasy in the 1950s and 60s?
That's actually I would say that's a complicated question. I don't have the exact answer to it. It has something to do with World War II. I'd also say that the radical, the sudden changes in the church was kind of difficult for some people to handle. I'd also say it would have to do with the technological developments like birth control, stuff like that. But I'm not really I accept. I probably don't have the best answer on that.
You see, well, first of all, with the birth control thing, you needed a demand there in the beginning for them to be accepted. But
there's
there are
always a demand.
Yeah, but there's two major reasons, right? One from Father Chad Ripperger, which is sort of apropos to what I was going to say, but right? The lack of virtue in the parents, right? That's the first one. But the one I wanted to really focus on is the fact that people weren't being taught their faith. So we can, talk about, normies or whatever not being analytical, but a lot of people in the 1950s and 60s just simply weren't taught their faith very well, and they just viewed it as something emotional and not grounded in reality. So naturally, when something else played with their emotions, like the girl at the bar or something, then they just dumped it, right? You can't expect people to hold on to the cross if they don't understand the cross. And sure, not everyone's going to be Aquinas, but there are serious analytical reasons why quote unquote normies departed from this. And I just, you see what I'm saying? I don't like the fact that we're describing ourselves as a class set apart, because how can you expect to win some sort of culture war if you're a class set apart?
Well, every movement needs a class set apart, the most ambitious people. But I actually really do understand really what you're saying speaks to me, basically. How you're talking, they didn't have a fundamental and kind of thorough education in this. Moral and religious education is the most important education, and the fact that they lack that is probably the reason that I would be concerned with. But I would also ask you, were those illiterate medieval peasants who were much more devout than the person in 1970 that maybe read some theology and was super educated and literate, what do you say to them?
I don't think they were anywhere near as uneducated as we think they are. Don't forget, there were a high number of monasteries in Europe. I think there was one every 20 miles. So you had people in contact with highly educated theologians, maybe not the level of Aquinas or anything like that, but people who knew the scriptures incredibly well, who copied the scriptures. That's the only way you could have manuscripts. They copied theological works, mostly St. Augustine. And you had these people walking around in close proximity and assisting in their villages. And of course, they're going to catch something by osmosis. Whereas nowadays, do you see that? I've seen an Eastern Orthodox monk once in my entire life. He happened to be walking down the road when I was at the Catholic Church. You have the poor, lonely priests who are stuck at home, stuck in their presbyteries and stuck in their churches with a small group of people coming to worship and to do adoration. But they aren't, this may vary from community to community, but they're not as present as they were in medieval life. And so, of course, you've got a bunch of secular humanists who aren't sophisticated enough to understand that natural sciences are predicated on intelligibility of the universe, which therefore necessitates an intelligent cause, right? You don't have that present. So that's going to cause serious problem. It's going to cause apostasy.
So you are saying that there was a 5% of clergy and those kinds of people in the monasteries that knew the words so well they knew it almost by heart, large sections of them, to make this manuscript, and then 95% of the peasantry was illiterate, but that elite few people worked really hard to do that osmosis.
Yes, I'm not suggesting that there aren't that everyone in the church or in the society is completely equal. What I'm saying is that to overemphasize this means that you're going to be cut off from everyone else. You can't expect to run a country as an elite cut off from everyone else. You need to be amongst the peasantry. You need to be amongst the craftsmen. You need to be amongst the business leaders and such if you want your society to become more traditional, because you don't, there's no water that comes out of the well without there being an aquifer there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give the postmodern take. I think you're both correct in a certain sense. So on the one hand, I think there were part of the reason for the decline of Christendom, I think, was due to external shocks. I think the First World War in particular sort of got the ball rolling for what would come later in terms of a lack of faith, it's sort of a shattering of the worldview. And the part of the reason I think it was going to happen anyway, but part of the reason it was so bad was part of what Renaissance Man was saying. The laity were not educated in their faith, and you see this all over the place. Particularly in, shame to say, some Orthodox circles and also some Catholic circles. You don't. It's like culturally Christian, culturally Catholic, culturally Orthodox, and if they run into any trouble, they quickly fall away from the faith because they don't have a rationale to stay. So I think that's important, but I do think there's probably a limit to which you can, indoctrinate them. Going around to everybody, read the Summa Theologica. Or if they're Orthodox, read John of Damascus, and Gregory of Palamas. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that necessarily they'll be able to understand all the nitty gritties. However, there is certainly a degree of education that is required, a proper catechism, so to speak. And also what Renaissance Man was saying about the need for public displays of Christianity, public presence of the clergy. I think that's severely lacking in our society. Just good old fashioned, even street preaching. How awesome would it be to see, like you guys remember in Skyrim, in that one that one town where they had the guy outside the hall who's like preaching doom and gloom. How great would it be? How great would it be to see, like a Catholic priest or like some Orthodox monk like come out of his monastery and he's just like preaching doom and gloom outside of Bear Stearns or something. That'd be awesome. I would love to see that. But I think part of it is a decline, frankly, of masculinity in the wider society, which affects masculinity in the faith. A bold, strong, commanding presence of Christian characters. And I think, if they did lead, the people would follow.
I think that this is from Jeremiah chapter 31, and this is one of the big proofs of Christianity as a new covenant over the old law. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was their husband, says the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it upon their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each man teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Now, why have I read this? It's because we don't necessarily have to teach the Summa. We don't necessarily have to have everyone sat down and reading St. John Chrysostom's homilies. When he's speaking of knowing the law, he's talking about an experiential, universal knowledge of God. And this comes through spiritual practice. This comes through prayer. This comes through adoration. This comes through mental prayer. And these are the things that the priests taught the people of the Middle Ages. For example, the Roman Catholic Rosary. It began as something called the Marian Psalter. Now, why did this develop? Because the people who were living in the villages were largely illiterate. They couldn't read. That didn't mean they didn't know anything. And they wanted to imitate the monks who would say 150 psalms a week. So, well, actually a day, some of them. The earlier Desert Fathers did this, but this is besides the point. So they took beads. They took, dried peas sometimes, and they tied them on strings, and they said the Hail Mary, right? Not the modern incarnation of the Hail Mary, something different, right? And this provided the Marian Psalter. And through this practice, they gained this experiential knowledge of God that in the Old Covenant was taught through the studying of Torah, right? And so that's what I'm suggesting here. I'm not suggesting that the education that the monks were imparting was scriptural and, discernibly knowledgeable, like discernible knowledge, right? Of course. I mean, there was an aspect of that. But the real knowledge that was imparted was experiential knowledge of God. I know that in the Eastern tradition, you have I don't know if we consider him a saint. I think that the Eastern Catholics do, but you have Simeon, the new theologian, who speaks about this experiential knowledge of God through his poems of the divine eros. This is the kind of knowledge I'm speaking of, not any knowledge that is didactic necessarily, but giving people the tools such that they can access God in an orthodox way and then let God take care of the rest.
That's a good point.
Man, I love these streams. But yeah, so perhaps the most based and reactionary radical thing to think is possibly that those illiterate medieval peasants that we scoff at were actually the most educated people, and we don't even breach the hems of the kind of education that the average person at that time received. Because I mean, what's the fundamental purpose of education? Yeah, I mean, we can instruct someone with skills in order to do economic tasks, but really the most essential part of education is teaching someone how they're giving them the tools and knowledge to express virtue in the way that that person is specifically able to express it. And so obviously we can see who is more educated.
Yeah, it's like they say in Star Wars, the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? So they didn't have a lot of book learning, but I think these people were fundamentally wise in a way that we have forgotten, frankly.
Yeah, in fact, the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, and I mean, I'm not certain of this, but I think this is also the wisdom that Christ gains in the Gospels. They're speaking of a Hebrew term, a Hebrew concept called chokhmah. And chokhmah isn't purely book learning knowledge. This isn't, in fact, actually, the wisdom literature tells you not to read too many books, but it's that experiential knowledge. And it's, in fact, another reason why Christ came. Because it's all well and good presenting the Torah in the 5 books of the Old Testament. The first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's all well and good having a Quran or having some divine law that is written down. But you need to know this experientially. You need it acted out in a person, which is why Christ came. Because he provides, in biography, the perfect example of the law. The very first psalm. Blessed is the man who hath not walked in the paths of the ungodly, nor stood in the way of sinners, nor sat in the chair of pestilence, right? The just man of the Psalms is made manifest in Christ, and he is the perfect teacher. You need this experiential, acted out wisdom to really build a society. For example, right, and something that's a bit less ethereal, right? You know judo in 2 different ways, right? You can sit and read the book on it, or you can go and train yourself in the moves. And it's the same with the Sermon on the Mount, right? It's all well and good hearing, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. But to truly be versed in that and the other words of Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, you have to practice them, and you have to make that manifest in your body.
So, if we take the claims of the Christian religion seriously, that a person came in physical incarnation to the world and actually lived a real life and was of flesh, had flesh and blood, then, and we also take the claim that this person was a true expression of the law, like he literally was logos, he literally was truth, justice, order, all these kinds of things. If we also take what Carlyle said seriously, is that the essential ingredient for civilization is commitment to order, justice, truth, blah blah blah. All these things are kind of synonymous. If we take that seriously, then the only tradition we need, is the life of that one person. And so, cast all other traditions to the wind, I guess.
Well, you see, there also needs to be commentary on it, because if you've ever read the Gospels, you'll know that Christ is like this like utterly incomprehensible character.
Oh wait,
Right.
but I'm Lutheran. Christ alone. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but even the Lutherans have their own tradition. They just very selectively read the fathers, right? You see, you need more than the Bible. I mean, you need the tradition there to even decide what's in the Bible in the first place, because you could end up making a very serious mistake in reading the Gospel of Thomas, where the very last saying says that Mary will go to heaven because she has to turn into a man, right? Like, she'll turn into a man before she goes to heaven, because only men can go to heaven, right? You need the tradition around it there as well. In fact, both Moses talks about the Sanhedrin, who are used to interpret the law of the Old Testament, and St. Paul mentions that the apostles also gained the traditions as well, right? You need an accompanying authority and tradition in order to interpret the life of the law. So you need that there as well, of course.
But if and there's always a contra, there's always a retort. I would say, yes, no, I'm actually a catechumen, but there's supposed to be that commentary on it, the tradition that forms it itself. But if I remember correctly, isn't this all about a dialogue to greater understand the tradition that was already there, to figure out the exact details of something that was already there and was eternal? So that's why I mean by you don't need anything else. It was already there. You just need to better understand it.
Well, no, like, you get parts of it through prayer, of course, but you have the pre-existing tradition, first of all, to set you on the right path, because you can read the Bible and come to the same conclusions as someone like David Koresh if you take the Bible alone. So you need that tradition there to direct you down the right path from the beginning. And secondly, you need people who have already got experiential knowledge of God to direct you. That's why we have spiritual fathers and spiritual directors. So you need all of this huge corpus of written tradition and oral tradition and authority as well. You can't just rely on the Gospels.
Well, I wasn't relying on the Gospels, but that's very based and authoritarian.
People to correct others who make clumsy analogies about the different parts of God, quote unquote, right? Yes. No, I yes. What simple essence? Yes.
I guess I'll get to a couple other super chats. Brad for 8 Australian says, "Wheat farmer here. Things you can trade me for my wheat when Fiat fails must be at a store of physical labor and or have used gold, fuel, or toilet paper." Okay. That was, of course, in reference to the discussion earlier. And that's very based in trad of you to be a wheat farmer. But I also got a super chat through my Subscribestar, Economic Bounty. This actually was from the last stream, but I didn't get to it last time, so this is a couple weeks late. But he asks, what is the probability of communism and the left comprising seriously oppressing and persecuting conservatives and Republicans? Is this hyperbole, or is this a serious threat that we need to look out for?
I think they already are, to a certain extent.
I mean, if we want to understand, certain scriptures could sustain a tradition, but the legal scripture of America has obviously failed. And if I'm able to get into a conversation with some of these so-called right-wing conservative intellectuals that still care about that document, it's going to be very enjoyable, let me say, because literally people are locked down in their homes. They can't even visit people for important holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas. And they're still citing that we could somehow salvage this piece of paper. This piece of paper was literally thrown out 150 years ago, at least at the Civil War period. And so, some traditions die out, some are eternal, as we can see.
Yeah, You see, the problem with the Constitution is that it was founded on a muddled philosophy in the beginning, as it was.
Yeah, no, I mean to answer the question for myself, I'd say I mean I think he's talking about even harder forms of oppression than what we currently are experiencing. And I don't know. I mean, will it ever be like really super bad, like mid 20th century bad? I don't know. I don't really see evidence of that. I mean, I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying I don't think there's anything we can really see now that we can say like it definitely will happen. But if you were in like 1933 Germany, you might not realize how bad it was going to get. So it's just you don't really know until you get there. So currently I don't really see any strong evidence that it will be like super bad. But still, it like the things I do think are extremely likely is this type of stuff I've talked about a lot before on this channel. Stuff like it just being impossible for conservatives to have children, or at least prominent conservatives, where they'll just declare basic conservative beliefs to be child abuse. And if you say, if you want to say, hold traditional views on sexual morality, then you're abusing your children by holding those views, and you can't be allowed to keep your children. That is a sort of pretty clear deduction of the left's logic that I could see them getting to in relatively short order. So that's the type of stuff that I'm really worried about.
Yeah, and on that specific point, fairly recently in France, they've put a motion to ban homeschooling, partially for this reason, because they don't want because they don't want parents teaching their children non-progressive ideas, which will cause complications for global homo, as it were.
Well, it's not. Oh wait, go ahead.
I will use my private jet that was purchased with 0.5 Bitcoin in the future. I will use that to fly to Antarctica, to fly to the Cayman Islands, to fly to Seychelles, and take my kids there, because they're never taking them and putting them in those forsaken secular schools.
Yeah, and I think at that specific point in France, the only thing to do is just ignore the order and have enough people ignore it, so that and this is what I was talking about earlier, the decline of masculinity in a real sense, where where are the masses of Christian men sort of stepping out and being like, no, this is absolutely unacceptable, and you're going to have to turn all of us, the millions of us, into criminals, because we are not going to tolerate this. That sort of thing used to happen not that long ago. I know in the United States, part of the reason they had rating systems, and it was a fairly prominent case with movies to sort of curtail some of the crazy stuff that was going on a little bit early in Hollywood, was because of Catholic social pressure. They're like, we have millions of Catholics, and none of them are going to, we're basically going to boycott the hell out of Hollywood unless they basically put a lid on some of the more unsavory things that they're producing. And it worked. So civil disobedience is necessary at a certain point.
Okay, so I think it's important to talk about why this actually happened in France. Because, you see, with the last election in France, a third of the people voted for the Front National. And they were primarily concerned with Islam. And the French are obviously very concerned with Islam. And so they're looking to undermine the institutional support behind Islam and get children out of it, right? Now, since the French Revolution, you've had a very large swath of the French populace involved in traditional Catholicism. There's a lot of traditional Catholics in France. It's kind of like a split society from what I've heard, right? You've got the Parisian intellectual types who are basically as secular as it gets. And then you've got traditionalists on the other side, right? Now, I'm not sure how much this banning of private schools will actually influence the Traps, because a lot of them are, former second estate members. They're former nobility, right? And they have a lot of power. So they could either just set up their own schools or pressure the local government to not enforce it. One of those laws that's on the books but isn't. But the Muslims, I'm not sure how much, or if they have enough institutional power in France to actually fight back against this, right? I know this because there's the Muslim acquaintance of mine who's constantly posting against this law. This is primarily targeted at Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, the French and the Germans too have a tradition of public education, which to me personally is revolting for many reasons. But on the major question of if things are going to get bad really quick, we like to say, oh, technological progress and wealth and prosperity doesn't actually mean the progress of civilization. Well, if you're going to take that conclusion, bring it to these farther predictions. We could be a bit richer technically, a bit more more access to material satisfaction, but it could go pretty far down the hill in terms of decline and depravity. So what I think is most likely is the acceleration of certain really bad social trends like the sexual Pandora's box, the homeschooling issue, and I mean, actually, we might actually have an even larger economic crisis, probably like the Depression, if the kind of spinning wheel of debt and monetary insanity continues. I basically think that's a ticking time bomb, but that's a personal opinion.
Well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I got a couple other super chats, so I guess I'll go through those. Just thoughts really for 5 Great British Pound says, really enjoyable chat, guys. I'm hoping to become Catholic one day, but I find it so complex. Where on earth does one start? Well, I mean, the first place to start with, like, actually becoming Catholic would be just phoning up your local parish or going to their website or whatever. And I sometimes I know people can get really sort of really obsessed with this, trying to find like the right parish. I really for just joining the church, I really think you just go to whatever is the closest and most convenient. As long as it's not obviously an awful parish, just sit through it. It may not be your favorite. They may be a bit cringe. Who knows? But just get through the RCIA process, and that's a class you'll have to register for. It will take like 6 months. And just get in the church, and then if you're really unhappy with that church, you can always go to one that you prefer later on. But just find whatever your local church is. If you're in a big city, there's probably multiple of them. And yeah, so that's like how you actually do the process. If you're looking to learn more about Catholicism, I'm a really big fan of Trent Horn. He's definitely my favorite Catholic apologist out there currently. I would really recommend both of his books. He has lots of books, but two of his books, Why We're Catholic and The Case for Catholicism. They're pretty basic books. They're not like super complex, but that's what I think is good about them. They're a really good introduction on Catholicism. The first one, The Case for the first one, Why We're Catholic, is just a basic explanation of all the major things that Catholics believe, and the second one, The Case for Catholicism, is a refutation of most of the main Protestant arguments. But both of those books are really good and succinct, so I'd really recommend both of those for learning about that type of stuff. And then there's of course many other books you can read if you're looking to learn more. But I definitely would say those are the easiest two to get started on. The Catholic Encyclopedia from 1917 also is very good. You can find it on the internet. And also, I mean, my Discord server is pretty good. I help, or not just me, but my server and me helps a lot of people with this type of stuff frequently. So, I would recommend my Discord server as a good place to sort of get connected with that sort of thing.
Okay, so if I'm going to give my 2 cents on that, you need to understand why you're attracted to Catholicism in the first place. Why are you interested in entering the church? Why are you being confirmed? Why are you getting baptized, maybe? Why do you want to be involved? And when you understand this, then you look for books along those sorts of lines, right? So, for example, if you're really interested in coming up with a worldview that's bulletproof, right? If you're interested in finding something that makes sense on a very, very basic level, go and read Peter Kreeft's books on Aquinas, or his book on Aquinas, the Modern Scholar series, and go and look into Ed Feser, who wrote an important book against New Atheism called The Last Superstition. If you're interested in, God's there anyway experientially, and you want to develop a closer relationship to God, there are a ton of spiritual books that you should read, but there's two really big ones I would recommend. right? The first one is The Imitation of Christ by what's his name? I can't remember his name. He was a 15th century priest, and this is a staple of Catholic spirituality. And what you want to do when you've got that book is learn about mental prayer. You want to learn how to be able to read a text. You repeat it to yourself 4 times. Then you think about it intellectually with your eyes closed, and then you begin to talk to God, with your mind, praise God, and then ask for things, and then make resolutions based on the text that you've just read. Mental prayer is a very Thomas à Kempis. You see, Justine has made it very clear. Yeah, Thomas à Kempis, right? You want to make resolutions based on that, and progress with life. Another one that's really good is The Fulfillment of All Desire, which I can't remember the name of the author, but he processes a lot of the more difficult spiritual classics. Now, I ended up going in at the deep end and reading St. John of the Cross's Ascent of Mount Carmel, which is a very, very complicated book. And if I'd found this book when I was more new to it, I'd have had a much easier time. If you're interested in understanding the scriptures, if you find the Bible beautiful, if you find the stories of Elijah and Elisha and Jesus and St. Paul and stuff beautiful, I'd recommend starting with a biblical scholar called Dr. Brant Petrie. And he's written 2 important books. The first one is The Case for Jesus, where he goes through not only the scriptural proofs, but also the reliability of the scriptures in immense detail. I really need this because one of my struggles has been with the scriptures. He goes through and he annihilates the secular biblical critiques. Like he's a genius. This guy isn't even cited by the biblical critics. He's like such a genius. He doesn't even have an H index for those who know what that is. And the other one is The Catholic Introduction to the Old Testament, where it looks at the reliability of the various books of the Old Testament. It goes through the historical issues of them. It gives you a basic breakdown of them, and it also demonstrates how the books of the Old Testament are married up in the new covenant that Christ institutes by the blood of his cross, and also in Catholic practice. That's how I've come to know like obscure passages in Jeremiah, right, through just sitting and reading this huge book. Also, Yiz the Eunuch, The Case for Christ is by Lee Strobel, I think. I don't think it's The Case for Jesus. The Case for Jesus is Dr. Brant Petrie's one. Yeah, so, like the important thing I'm emphasizing here is ask yourself why you are attracted to Christ's church, and then emphasize on that. And if you have questions, seek them, knock upon the door and you shall find. And it shall be answered even. I'm mixing he who seeks shall find, never mind.
Yeah, I have another super chat, so I'll go through that. For $10 Great British Pounds, or for 10 Great British Pounds, it says, ever since I started going to the local market instead of the supermarket, baking rather than buying bread, and going to church again, I felt my soul lifted and myself become more complete.
This is my favorite super chat of the night. Mind if I riff a little on that one?
Yeah, sure.
I'd say that I do like that the person said that her soul's lifted. One of my favorite movies is actually this Japanese film. It's the last film that Miyazaki made. It's super wholesome. Good for you if you have a spouse or whatever. Good to watch with them or whatever. It's called The Wind Rises, and you have that metaphor of the breeze, like this calm breeze coming about, and it kind of causes you to ascend. You feel this light feeling, this rising up feeling, and actually that's what tradition is all about. See, the fundamental lie of the progressives is human, ontological, and moral innocence. Dave the Distributor just made an awesome video about new atheism, and that's basically the fundamental assumption. The fundamental assumption is that, if we tear down all these rules and obligations and institutions of authority, then people will be free to actually pursue what will make them happy or whatever. And obviously, that's the most pernicious lie that you could ever tell someone ever. In reality, the chains of tradition paradoxically are light, and they actually lift you up. So it's this fundamental thing that people have to understand, that all those rules, regulations, obligations, when someone actually goes through it, at the end, they understand why their soul's lifted up. They understand that rising feeling that they get.
Truth is attractive. It always is. Once you experience it.
Yeah.
That's why Renaissance needs to accept the other thing we were talking about earlier.
What, Bitcoin?
Oh yeah, no, it's nothing to see here. Renaissance, it's fine.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's been 2 hours. Does anyone have anything else they want to talk about, or is that it? Or
I'm ready to go. It's 1 a.m. here in South Africa. But yeah, I've had a fun time, guys. I really, really enjoyed this. And yeah, if anyone wants to go over to my channel and check out some history videos on fascism and whatnot, go and subscribe.
yeah, make sure to subscribe to everyone here. And of course, make sure to donate to Settlers Lament, subscribestar.com/Settlers Lament. I suppose I'll apologize slightly for that. I don't know. Some people got kind of upset with me a couple streams ago for saying stuff like, if you can afford to watch, if you have time to watch, you have time to donate or whatever. That was a joke. I don't know how you didn't understand that was a joke, but yes, that's a joke. You don't have to donate if you don't want to. But some people are upset with that. So I do not want to annoy my audience too much. But yeah, I mean, please make sure to subscribe to everyone here. Donate if you can; it would be greatly appreciated. And I also sell T-shirts on Teespring. And I also have a Patreon if Subscribestar doesn't work for you.